This is the December 18th, 2019 afternoon session of the Portland City Council, not to be confused with the morning session of City Council, which ended a couple of minutes ago. Carla, good afternoon. Please call the roll.
Good afternoon. Udaley?
Here.
Fritz?
Here.
Fish? Hardesty?
Here.
Wheeler?
Here, and I think we can forego the reading of the rules. If it looks like we need to have the rules read, I'll bounce it back over to you. Could you read, please, item number 1193?
Amend Motor Vehicle Fuels Code to move authority to establish, revise as necessary, and enforce standards for biofuels sold in the city to the Director of the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability.
Colleagues, I am introducing an ordinance to update Portland City Code Chapter 16.60, the Renewable Fuel Standard, sometimes referred to as RFS. We'll be hearing from the Bureaus of Planning and Sustainability and Development Services. The purpose of this ordinance is to move the administration of Portland's RFS from the Bureau of Development Services to Planning and Sustainability for code updates. When the RFS was originally adopted, the purpose was to promote the use of biofuels as an alternative to fossil fuels and to stimulate growth of the local biofuels industry. The RFS has been successful in creating local demand for renewable fuels, developing the local industry, and reducing Portland's carbon emissions from transportation fuels. The RFS is an important transitional strategy to help us achieve 100% renewable transportation by 2050, along with electrifying transportation. The City of Portland has been leading by example in its transition to 100% renewable energy. We currently purchase green energy to power city operations. The City of Portland sedan fleet is currently 33% electric, and we're seeking to reach 100% as quickly as possible. Last week, I announced a new EV First policy to require city boroughs to purchase electric vehicles when replacing sedans and to launch a public-private partnership to invest in electric vehicle charging infrastructure for the city's fleet. And other commissioners offered up some other great ideas, and I'm remembering Commissioner Hardesty, you'd mentioned that we'll have a demonstration soon of a potential large-size electric vehicle in the Fire Bureau, or at least the opportunity to see it and kick the tires, as it will. To complement our work on electrification, the City of Portland fleet is using 100% renewable diesel made in the United States. The switch to renewable diesel over the last 4 years had the equivalent emissions reduction of avoiding 61 million miles driven by the average car. That's a lot of miles for an average car. Renewable diesel is an excellent solution for medium and heavy-duty equipment that don't yet have viable electric alternatives on the market. Recently, we've heard from stakeholders about the need to overhaul the RFS for better alignment with state policy and inclusion of new emergent biofuels like the renewable diesel that were not considered during the development of the RFS. Additionally, updating the RFS will deliver important and significant carbon reduction benefits for Portland. To this end, BDS and BPS have agreed to transfer the RFS code to BPS for ongoing administration. As directed by the ordinance, I've asked BPS to conduct stakeholder engagement with frontline communities and the local biofuel industry as they develop policy recommendations to bring back to the Council in 2020. I'm also directing BPS to review the RFS to see how it can help the city reach the transportation sector's share of the city's climate goals, utilizing a carbon intensity standard, and to seek better alignment with the State of Oregon Clean Fuels Program. Kyle Diesner with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability and Emily Sandy with the Bureau of Development Services are here to present. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Mayor Wheeler, Commissioners. Good afternoon. For the record, I'm Kyle Diesner, Climate Action Program Coordinator for the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. As Mayor Wheeler noted, we're here today to talk about transferring Portland's renewable fuel standard to planning and sustainability for ongoing administration and code updates. Portland's carbon emissions are dominated by transportation, accounting for 42% of local emissions. You can see this in the large brown circle, followed in descending order by the commercial sector at 22%, residential sector at 18%, and manufacturing and industrial emissions following that at 14%. The transportation sector emissions come from driving passenger vehicles, transportation of goods, diesel buses, other off-road mobile equipment like construction equipment. Transportation is the only sector where emissions have actually increased since 1990. Today, emissions from transportation have increased 14% over their lowest levels in 2012. The trend is obviously moving in the wrong direction.
Could I just ask a question on that slide?
Sure.
Very quick one. I thought construction was a big problem. Where does construction come in on one of those bubbles?
It's part of the transportation sector emissions under the 42%.
It's part of okay, thank
yes. Much smaller share than the actual driving of vehicles. But
thank you.
In terms of air quality, it's a bigger contributor.
Thank you.
All right, so this next chart here shows our carbon emissions by source. Top source there, electricity, 28%, but followed by gasoline at 25%. It's the second largest source of emissions in Portland. And then you can see the fourth largest source there in green is diesel at 14%. These emissions and their share would be higher today if not for Portland's renewable fuel standard. Fortunately, we know how to reduce transportation sector emissions, and the city is taking steps. The first step for all of us to do our part in reducing consumption of transportation fuels. We can do this by reducing the number of single occupancy vehicle trips, by shifting to active transportation and public transit, and reducing our vehicle miles traveled. Portland Bureau of Transportation has estimated that to meet our 2030 climate targets, we'll need to reduce driving by 50%. That's all Portlanders need to reduce driving by 50%. Second, we need to continue to plan for smart, connected communities that are affordable, walkable, and transit connected. This requires continuing the approach adopted by the 2035 Comprehensive Plan and passing important policies like residential infill and better housing by design. Our work on land use planning should enable more Portlanders to live closer to where they work and where they go to school. Lastly, and why we're here today, all trips that remain must be decarbonized by transitioning to electric vehicles and renewable fuels. Here you can see the impact of the RFS on reducing consumption of gasoline in Multnomah County. The RFS corresponds to a 10% reduction in the sale of gasoline since 2008, the volume offset directly by ethanol. This policy was so successful that the state of Oregon adopted the same standards, House Bill 2210, for all gasoline and diesel sold in the state of Oregon and phased in those requirements through 2011. Portland intentionally left the RFS in place in case there was a need to take a different approach at the local level. Our rising transportation emissions have elevated the need for more aggressive local action. I'm going to hand this off to my colleague at BDS, Emily Sandy, to talk about the RFS as it exists today.
Good afternoon. I'm Emily Sandy, Code and Policy Analyst with the Bureau of Development Services. Portland was the first city in the United States to adopt a local renewable fuel standard in 2006. The renewable fuel standard requires fuel suppliers in Portland to provide a minimum volume of biofuel, biodiesel, and ethanol, blended with all transportation fuels sold in the city of Portland. This means that every gallon of diesel fuel includes 5% biodiesel, and every gallon of gasoline contains 10% ethanol. The RFS also includes exclusions for fuels produced from palm oil and qualifying feedstocks for biodiesel to promote local production. The Renewable Fuel Standard was passed in 2006 by City Council with the adoption of Portland City Code Chapter 16.60. It assigned administration and enforcement to the Bureau of Development Services and authorized the Bureau to promulgate administrative rules to enforce. Administrative rules were then adopted in 2007. In 2009, due to the economic recession and budget cuts at BDS, the RFS was transferred to the Water Bureau for temporary implementation via a Memorandum of Understanding. In 2010, also due to the economic recession, the Water Bureau suspended the RFS requirement to increase the biodiesel blend to 10% biodiesel. In 2012, the RFS was transferred back to the Bureau of Development Services. Since that time, BDS has been collecting qualifying feedstock origin declarations forms from fuel suppliers. Those verify compliance with the requirements, and BDS has also been responding to public inquiries. In 2018, BPS initiated discussions with BDS to transfer responsibility for administering and enforcing Chapter 16.60 and the administrative rule. BDS is fully supportive of this transfer. BPS has the technical expertise to enforce, monitor, and amend these requirements as needed, and the requirements are clearly in line with BPS's mission and their other responsibilities. I'm going to hand it back to Kyle to talk more about recent developments in fuel markets.
The market for domestic biofuel production has expanded significantly since the RFS was first implemented in 2007, including new production practices like co-processing of biofuels in fossil fuel production facilities. New emergent biofuels like renewable diesel have come onto the market, and they don't even meet the definitions of biofuels as defined in Portland City Code. And in 2015, the Oregon legislature passed SB 324, allowing DEQ to implement the Oregon Clean Fuels Program. The Clean Fuels Program is intended to reduce carbon emissions from Oregon's transportation fuels 10% over a 10-year period. The program is essentially a cap and trade program for transportation fuels. This approach is complementary of a local renewable fuel standard, which is a volumetric standard. While the Clean Fuels Program seeks to reduce a share of Oregon's emissions across the state, the volumetric standard ensures that higher blends of biofuels are used right here in Portland. The local market has grown so much since 2007 that the State Clean Fuels Program now has 284 different approved fuels. Oregon DEQ certifies biofuels on a life cycle basis depending on their feedstock and production practices. The life cycle work at Oregon DEQ and also the California Air Resources Board have demonstrated that not all biofuels are equal. It's critical that as we promote the increased use of biofuels, we do so on the basis of life cycle carbon emissions. The chart shows life cycle emissions for a few of the approved fuels in Oregon. The data is showing carbon emissions per unit of energy. A life cycle analysis considers total carbon emissions produced from the full life cycle of fuel, not just the tailpipe emissions. So for example, feedstocks are grown, harvested, corn, soy, waste grease is collected, and transported to a production facility. Biofuels are then produced from those feedstocks, sometimes along with other byproducts like animal feed or corn oil. The fuel is then transported to fuel suppliers and local markets. When the fuel arrives in Portland, it's blended at the rack with gasoline and diesel and distributed to fueling stations across the city. This life cycle assessment looks at the total carbon emissions produced throughout the process. So this includes natural gas used for production and land use changes like deforestation. Looking at fuels on a life cycle basis allows us to identify the most environmentally beneficial fuels, not just those with lower tailpipe emissions. Here you can see the range of life cycle emissions for biodiesel and ethanol that have been certified by Oregon DEQ as compared to the top two, gasoline and diesel. For example, today, biodiesel at the bottom of the chart with the lowest life cycle carbon emissions is produced from waste products like waste cooking oil and greases. These are collected and processed by local companies like Sequential Biofuels to create low carbon biodiesel. You'll also notice the lowest carbon ethanol in Portland is from cellulosic corn products. This cellulosic material cannot be used as food, so it doesn't reduce food production, but it's a byproduct. We expect non-edible plant material, rather than corn, will be the dominant source of ethanol in the future. You can also see that even the highest carbon biofuels are still lower than diesel and gasoline. In addition, biofuels are not made from fossilized carbon. The emissions from their use are considered biogenic emissions or emissions that are part of the carbon cycle. This differs from fossil fuels like gasoline and diesel, where the carbon has been sequestered underground for millions, if not hundreds of millions of years, and when it's combusted, that fossilized carbon is pumped back into the atmosphere, driving climate change. In Portland, the RFS has had a significant effect on reducing local emissions from transportation, even with low-volume bioblends. For 10 years, the RFS has been in effect. It has reduced local emissions by 2.8 million metric tons of CO2 equivalents. The reduction is equivalent to 7 billion miles driven by an average gasoline-powered vehicle. That's pretty impressive savings right there. So the RFS has demonstrated how we can reduce local transportation emissions, and we're already doing this in a way that supports Oregon's local economy. The RFS will remain a key strategy for Portland to reduce transportation sector emissions, along with electrification, mode shift to transit and active transportation, reduced VMT, vehicle miles traveled, and land use planning so people can live closer to where they work and where they go to school. So next up for updating the RFS, we'll come back for a second reading. And if the code is approved to transfer to BPS, BPS will take on research on market trends and biofuel forecasts, researching the technical feasibility and limitations of expanding biofuels here in Portland. We'll also conduct stakeholder engagement with industry groups and frontline communities who bear the brunt and the direct effects of climate change, including those that experience the impacts on air quality from our transportation choices. Lastly, we will prepare policy recommendations for council consideration. And so I'll conclude by acknowledging the following. Following this item, you'll consider readopting the remanded ordinance restricting bulk fossil fuel terminals. We wanted to pair these items together today to demonstrate that as we're limiting new capacity for fossil fuels, we're also expanding opportunities for renewable fuel development, a key prong in our strategy to reduce transportation sector emissions. I look forward to returning later in 2020 with recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. I've never seen such excitement talking about fuel, so I appreciate the enthusiasm you bring to this presentation. At the end, you said something about looking for other opportunities to develop renewable fuel sources. What does that look like, in your opinion?
Well, a good example of that is renewable diesel, which has emerged since 2007. It's a new fuel on the market that doesn't meet the code. So we'll be exploring new fuels like that have emerged that just don't meet the standards as they exist. It's possible the standard could expand in other ways. That's part of the research that we'll need to do. So I can't really give you a direct answer today.
Oh, so it's just a teaser then, just to see if we were
yes.
paying attention to what you were saying. Thank you so much. It sounds like you've done really good work so far, and it's amazing. $6 billion is what we've saved as far as admissions since we started this process. That's a pretty startling number.
Yeah, and just to clarify, that's 7 billion miles driven by an average vehicle that we've offset through renewable fuels. So
I want to see that vehicle.
right?
And I guess that raises the question, right? We all know that driving in the city of Portland now is a very slow, methodical, stop and go kind of process. Are we really reducing carbon emissions if people are stopping and starting and crawling along in areas well under what the intended speed limit is?
Certainly, congestion has an impact on emissions from transportation, and certainly air quality as well. And so that's something we should consider, but congestion is also a forcing mechanism to get people out of their cars. So it's a complex dynamic that we'll need to balance carefully.
I just think that if we talk about how much we've cleaned the air, there doesn't seem to attach the sense of urgency to say, and what else, right? Because as we know, what you're doing by itself is actually not going to have the impact that we all want to see on the climate. And so it's good to be able to connect the dots, at least for the broader community. So thank you.
Does that complete your report? Very good. Commissioner Fritz, and then we'll see about public testimony.
Could you please put the slide back up that had the inverted triangle with electricity at the top of it?
There it is.
I think that's really fascinating. And that's the reason the electricity is up there is because half of our electricity comes from coal. Is that right?
Yes, coal is the primary carbon source within our electricity mix.
So a lot of the discussions we've been having about how can we get people into electric cars, et cetera, doesn't necessarily get at where we're going. And so I really appreciate your calling out that leaving the fuels in the ground and using the ones that are already in the system is actually the best for the climate for right now.
Yes.
And I also want to commend Commissioner Udaley for the ROSE project with the transit lines. You can take the slide down now, thank you. TriMet recently came out with several lines that are now having to adjust their schedules because they're going faster, and I really appreciate that.
It's really exciting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
How many people do we have signed up, Carla?
I show just one.
Very good. Come on up.
Ian Hill.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you for your patience.
Absolutely.
Thank you for this opportunity, dear Mayor Wheeler and members of the council. I apologize for reading my testimony.
We do it all the time.
Okay, thank you for that. So for the record, my name is Ian Hill, co-founder of Sequential Biodiesel. I am here today to testify in support of updating Portland's renewable fuel standard for better alignment with the state's clean fuel program and the city's climate action and renewable energy goals. Sequential is a vertically integrated biodiesel company, meaning that we collect the raw material that we need to make our primary product and sell our finished products directly to the end users. In our case, the primary raw material or feedstock that we use is used cooking oil from the restaurant and food industry. The feedstock or oil collection section of the business operates in 5 states up and down the West Coast. We currently serve over 20,000 food establishments, including approximately 20% of the restaurants in Oregon. The material that we collect is not only used for making ultra-low carbon biodiesel, but also some of that material that is not suitable for efficiently making biodiesel is excellent feedstock for anaerobic digesters or making renewable natural gas. We currently supply this high-energy waste material to most of the digesters in Oregon. In the fall of 2018, we merged with a California biodiesel producer, Crimson Renewables. Our combined annual capacity is over 50 million gallons a year and growing. I'm going to skip over a little bit of the testimony because it was included earlier. Thanks to the state of Oregon's robust clean fuel program, Oregon now measures and quantifies full life cycle carbon emissions from all transportation fuels consumed in Oregon. Any transportation fuel that is either produced or imported into Oregon has to have a carbon intensity value, or CI, assigned to it by the Department of Environmental Quality. For example, the average petroleum diesel, as we saw earlier, the average CI for petroleum diesel is about 100. And the average CI of the biodiesel that was imported into Oregon last year was a little over 35 CI. The fuel that Sequential makes here in Salem has a CI value of just under 15, an 85% reduction in carbon intensity compared to the baseline petroleum diesel. The point here is that we have the ability to reduce our transportation carbon emissions quickly with current technology. But there is still a market access problem. After 100 years plus of being the only transportation option available to consumers, displacing petroleum fuels out of the marketplace is difficult. That is why there is a role for the City of Portland and a renewable fuel standard. In summation, we strongly support the moving of authority over the city's renewable fuel standard to the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. It is time for the city to restart this program and look to expand it, because the clock is ticking on reducing our carbon emissions, and we have the technology to make significant progress right now. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. We appreciate your being here. Commissioner Fritz?
Yeah, thank you very much. You've been a great partner with the city from the very beginning, and I appreciate you taking the time to be here today. I think you would join me in honouring Commissioner Randy Leonard, without whom this programme would not have got going. Absolutely. I was looking at the slide that said that the Water Bureau was in charge of it for 4 years, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, am I in charge of that now? And the reason that was because Commissioner Leonard was in charge of the Water Bureau, so I'm glad that it's now going to find its rightful home and a gracious transition between development services and planning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
All right, and I want to second that. Commissioner Leonard and I tended to argue about a lot of things, and this is an area where we would have found great agreement. Mm-hmm. And so I appreciate that historical perspective. And former Commissioner Leonard, wherever you are.
He's probably watching. He watches a
Well,
lot.
while the impeachment hearings are going on, you think he's watching this? Randy, if you're watching this, please change the channel. But
he's committed to biofuels.
No, that's good, and he deserves the credit. And thank you for acknowledging that and reminding us of that. Is there any further discussion on this item before I move it? This is a first reading of a non-emergency ordinance. It moves to second reading. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the testimony. Next up is item number 1194.
Readopt remanded ordinance number 188142 to restrict bulk fossil fuel terminals.
Colleagues, we're back today to continue our work on the fossil fuel terminal zoning amendments. To help reorient everyone where we are on the proposals, the intent of the fossil fuel terminal zoning amendments is to restrict new storage tank capacity for fossil fuels. This had originally come to the City Council back in 2019, and upon legal review by the courts was remanded back to the City of Portland. So we have now retooled it. We believe it will withstand even careful legal scrutiny. Voting on this is in line with our values as a city to do everything possible to protect the health and safety of our community from fossil fuel infrastructure expansion. As we work to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, the first step is to ensure that the situation doesn't get any worse. As you may recall, we held a public hearing November 20th, and we left the written record open until December 2nd. Today we'll be voting on the amendments to the fossil fuel terminal zoning ordinance, the findings, and the staff report to reflect on that testimony. I note that a lot of the testimony that we received mentioned the urgency with which we need to act to address this danger and to further the transition off fossil fuels, which is why this item is presented as an emergency ordinance that will go into effect immediately upon passage. Tom Armstrong from BPS will give us an overview of the ordinance amendments, but just briefly to remind you, there are 3 amendments that we'll be voting on. The first is the Fossil Fuels Terminal Zoning Amendments Ordinance. The second is to vote on the amendments to the ordinance findings. The third is to then vote on the amendments to Exhibit B, the remand report, and then, of course, to vote on the main motion as amended. Tom, good afternoon. How are you today?
Doing well.
Excellent.
Happy to be here finally this afternoon. I'm Tom Armstrong from the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and as the mayor just described, the first amendment is to amend the ordinance. There's really 2 types of changes. One of the findings we've modified or corrected the reference to the LUBA order that identified the remand issues that we needed to address. And then the second changes are to the to just correct the exhibits, to refer to the exhibits that are in front of you today, so that we have the ordinance in alignment with all the other pieces.
All right, very good. So for each of these items, staff will provide a very brief introduction followed by a motion, a second, and then our votes. Does that make sense to everyone? Commissioner Hardesty?
Thank you, Mayor. Let me just say, when I get this at council and I've only got a couple of page resolution ahead of time, that causes me concern.
Tom, can you explain then what these documents are? These are the documents that reflected the hearings that we had last time.
Sure. So I understand, Commissioner Hardesty, your concern about this. We've been trying to update this document since the record closed on December 2nd. So really the thick document, Exhibit A, are the findings of fact. And that is where, and this is sort of what the issue was in front of LUBA. We have to go through and address all of the policies in the comp plan, and we had done that as part of the original finding. And then once we've heard all of the testimony, especially the written testimony that raised specific issues, legal issues with respect to the ordinance, we went back through these findings to specifically address and point to evidence in the record as to how the ordinance addresses those issues that have been raised.
Tom, can I try and put this in plain speak? Because my understanding of what this document is, this is our legal defense, correct?
Correct.
Because the last time it was remanded, my recollection is the city was admonished for not reviewing the record fully, including potential criticisms of the 2016 ordinance and tying it back to the ordinance. So this is actually the painstaking work of going back through all of the individual testimony that council heard, tying it back to the ordinance and responding to each and every criticism. Is that a fair interpretation of what this document is?
It is, and it shows how we considered that testimony and how we respond or refute much of that testimony with evidence in the reports in the record, the seismic safety studies, the fossil fuel consumption forecast that I presented at the hearing, and all of that to document how we as the city and the council have considered those issues in adopting this.
So this is not additional testimony. This is
Correct.
A statement about why we believe the ordinance is legally defensible given the criticisms that we all heard in the public testimony.
Correct.
Legal counsel, anything you want to add to that?
I would just supplement to say that the findings were included in the initial filing. This is just an amendment to further reflect the testimony and respond to that testimony.
Thank you.
And
Commissioner Fritz?
Tom, did you present this at Commissioner's Assistance on Monday? Or at execs last Friday?
I did not. I did send a copy of it yesterday when we finally finished our review and back and forth with the city attorney's office when it was complete.
So Derek in your office and Claire in mine, others at 1 o'clock yesterday afternoon got this.
Well, that's lovely. Neither of them have a vote on the council. So I'm happy they got it yesterday, and it would have been helpful had I had some information prior to. So it's nice that staff finally got it. But again, when you're presenting something that thick and it's an emergency, you probably want to make sure that we have time to actually ask any questions that we may have.
Very good. All right, so the first item is the vote on the amendments to the fossil fuel terminal zoning amendments ordinance. Tom, could you briefly describe these amendments?
Yeah, as shown under Amendment 1 on the memo, again, there's two types of changes. The first is to finding 27 that corrects a reference to the LUBA decision, and then there are the second set of changes are to change the references to the exhibits to reflect today's date and today's decision as they will be amended in the next motions.
Very good. I'll entertain a motion to move the amendments to the ordinance for the vote to approve.
So moved. Second.
I have a motion from Commissioner Daly, a second from Commissioner Fritz. Any further discussion? Carla, can you please call the roll on that amendment? On those amendments, sorry.
Daly?
So is this the one and only vote, or are we
No,
doing
there are three, so this is the
see.
first package, the
Just let us
amendments
know
to the
when we're
fossil
last
fuel
one.
terminal
Yes.
zoning amendments.
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye.
Hardesty?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye. The amendment package passes. Our next item is the vote on the amendments to the ordinance findings. Tom, could you please describe those?
Yes, this is Exhibit A. This is the thick document in your packet. And as I explained, we received a number of substantial written testimony from the Portland Business Alliance, from Zenith Energy, from the Western States Petroleum Association, that raised a number of different legal issues that we needed to consider. This is the document that LUBA refers to that shows, well, how did council consider those arguments and what evidence in the record supports the decision that you're taking today. And so we have amended and updated this Exhibit A to reflect that testimony and to point to specific reports and evidence in the record to show that we've considered and incorporated that into this exhibit.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded.
Great. Call the roll.
Daly?
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye.
Hardesty?
No.
Wheeler?
Aye. The amendment passes. The next vote is on,
Exhibit B.
thank you, I'm on the wrong page. The next vote is on amendments to Exhibit B, the remand report. Tom, will you please describe these amendments?
Yeah, if you recall, back on the November 20th hearing, we had some technical amendments to change the neighborhood contact section of the ordinance to make it align with recent changes to the zoning code. That has now been incorporated into this exhibit. This exhibit shows all of the detailed line item strike-throughs to the zoning code, along with the commentary explaining those changes, and so it's been updated to reflect that amendment.
Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Did we move it?
Oh, I'm sorry, I
So moved.
apologize. Thank
Second.
you.
There we go.
Commissioner Daly moves, Commissioner Fritz seconds. Carla,
And there's
please call the
one
roll.
more vote, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Udaly,
Aye.
Aye.
Fritz,
Sorry, aye.
Hardesty,
No.
Wheeler.
Aye. The amendment's adopted. Now, do I have a motion to move the amendment fossil fuel terminal zoning amendments ordinance for a vote to approve?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Daly, a second from Commissioner Fritz. Carla, can you please call the roll?
Udaly,
Well, I didn't get to be here the first time this passed, so it's exciting to be here now. I'm proud to serve on a council at a time when, as a collective, we're taking forward-thinking steps to create resiliency and to protect our future in the city. Knowing how a major earthquake will change the landscape requires us to act now to ensure we aren't fighting a river on fire, river of fire, my favorite earthquake-related term, while also trying to save lives and rebuild our community. Decreasing our vulnerabilities now will help save lives, quicken our recovery, and strengthen our ability to be there for each other in the event of a major catastrophe. Thank you to my colleagues, Bureau staff, and especially, as always, the community for working together on this commitment. I vote aye.
Fritz,
So River of Fire would be a great name for a rock band, but other than that, we do not want to see it. And so thank you, Tom Armstrong and the entire Bureau and everybody who's worked on this. Thank you, Mayor Wheeler, for your support of this. We've been working on this so long. It's been several of my staff who've been involved with it. Christina Nieves, Claire Adamsick, Cynthia Castro, and of course Jim Crow, my Chief of Staff, and so thank you to all of them. This has been a very complicated process, and we really want to make it right. So while I might, on occasion, nitpick on various details, on this one, I know that our staff in the City Attorney's Office and with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability have really dotted all the I's and crossed the T's. And I am not qualified to nitpick. So I'm glad to not be able to do that. I'm glad to be able to support it. Thank you to our community advocates who are here to make sure that things went well this afternoon. Even though we're not taking testimony, we appreciate seeing your smiling faces. Aye.
Hardesty,
I appreciate the long time that's been devoted to actually updating this policy. I would have liked to have heard more about it as we were moving through the process. I do understand that there have been a couple of questions that my staff have asked that you answered very quickly, and I appreciate that. As a rule, I read every single thing I vote on. Because I want to make sure that when my neighbors walk up to me and say, "Why did you do this stupid thing?" I actually have a good reason for why I did that stupid thing, right? And so I understand the sense of urgency with this, and therefore I will vote aye on the motion.
Wheeler,
Continuing to allow new fossil fuel terminals and additional storage tank capacity is a threat to our community from a public safety perspective, from a public health perspective, and from an environmental perspective. And this is especially true in the event of a major Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. We know that. The first step to reduce the risk is to ensure that the situation doesn't get any worse by allowing more terminals and additional storage tanks to be built in an area that we know is at high risk for liquefaction in the event of a significant earthquake. By allowing more terminals, we also undermine our local and our global efforts to transition off of fuels that lead to climate change. While we recognize that there are other measures that need to be taken, this in and of itself is hardly sufficient, and that we intend to bring forward other ideas in 2020, it's imperative that we readopt these zoning code amendments to have them go into effect without any further delay. I want to thank all of my prior colleagues. This was originally supported back in 2016. It was very controversial then, and I want to remind people of that. And my former colleagues, Mayor Hales at the time, and other commissioners who are not with us here today, Commissioner Fritz, who is Commissioner Fish, who's probably watching on television. They took a lot of heat for this. And it was a very important and a very principled stand that they took. And so I feel grateful. Well, first of all, I'm not grateful that it got remanded, but I'm grateful that I get to stand here in their footsteps, and second, and support the work that they did back in 2016. I want to thank our legal counsel who's been working on this pretty much nonstop for the last 3-ish years, and I want to thank the Bureau and your hard work on this. Perseverance does pay off. I'm very happy to support this. I vote aye, and the ordinance is adopted as amended.
Mayor, if I could just remind you, I
Sure.
do have a hard out at 4:30, so I can go spend 2 more hours in a meeting and take an
All right,
important
well, let's
vote.
jam. Let's jam. So now what we're going to do is go back through the items that we did not get to this morning. And for those of you who are presenting items on behalf of my bureaus, I'm asking you to please be as succinct and thorough as possible. So the first up is 1183.
Create a citywide obligations reserve fund.
Hang on, I have something. All right, colleagues, this item authorizes the creation of a new citywide obligations reserve fund. Obligations reserve fund, you may ask, what's that? This action will fill an important and strategic gap in our current fund structure to further our financial sustainability efforts. Council and our city leaders have been taking measures to be more planful and coordinated in our efforts to address large, long-term financial liabilities, as with the Council's adoption of the strengthened financial policies last April. However, until now, we did not have a shared mechanism within our budgeting and accounting system to support these efforts. This fund provides for that mechanism. Budget Director Jessica Nard and City Treasurer Bridget O'Callahan are here to very briefly explain this item.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Mayor, members of Council. For the record, Jessica Kennard, City Budget Director, here with Bridget O'Callahan. Excuse me, I ran over here. You guys went through that last item so fast. So briefly, as the Mayor said, the creation of this fund provides for a critical mechanism to ensure the city can meet its comprehensive financial management policies. This citywide obligations reserve will function as a central repository for resources to be deposited into to responsibly plan for our long-term liabilities. So, as a reminder, this action you'll take today simply establishes the fund. Any decisions to appropriate resources to this fund will be separately addressed by Council during budget decision-making in subsequent cycles. So I have other talking points and I can answer more questions, but I know you have a lot of items in front of you today. So
You just answered my question.
okay.
Any questions? All right. Any public testimony on this item, Carla?
Maggie and Diana.
I don't see either of them here. Very good. Call the roll.
Udaley.
Thank you. Regain your breath now. I vote aye.
Fritz.
This is really important work and a very serious issue, so thank you both of you for doing your due diligence so that we can just sit here and vote. Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Wheeler.
I'm glad Commissioner Hardesty didn't call me out as a nerd on this kind of stuff, because I thought she might. This is really hard work. And the coordination effort that you're trying to put into place here, I think, will pay off in spades for the people of the city. And this is what I call backbone work. It's the kind of stuff nobody notices, but if you don't have it, everybody notices. So thanks for the great work. I vote aye. The ordinance is adopted. Thanks for your efforts. Next up will be 1185, please.
Amend contract with SAP Public Services, Inc. to increase the not-to-exceed value by $2,821,024 for software licenses, maintenance, and related services through June 2021.
So this also comes under the category of backbone or infrastructure to help us deliver services better to the people of the city. SAP Public Services was selected as the city's enterprise system all the way back in June of 2006, and it was originally implemented through the finance module in 2008, and then it went citywide with other modules, including human resources in June of 2009. SAP Public Services was chosen through a rigorous RFP process and selected because of the depth and breadth of the functionality it provided. And SAP has continued to expand their platform into a tightly integrated best-of-breed offering. It's used by many, many jurisdictions. The city's SAP system currently has 6,500 users. The Technology Executive Steering Committee, chaired by CAO Tom Reinhardt, has approved the SAP EBS roadmap, and this action includes laying the SAP infrastructure platform for the next 5 to 10 years. The current contractual agreement with SAP 30005309 is in effect until June of 2021, with the option of extending out to June 2026 if we so choose. BPS has appropriation in their fiscal year 1920 budget to cover the first year of anticipated expenses, and funding for the second year is also included in the base budget for fiscal year 2021. Further funding for the contract extension to June 2026 would be included in the base budgets in future years and presented to the Council at that time for the question of extension. Here to present on this contract is BTS Director Jeff Baer and Information Systems Manager Diane Allen. Welcome, both of you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler, members of City Council. I'm Jeff Baer, the Director of the Bureau of Technology Services, and as Mayor said, along with me is Diana Allen, who manages our Enterprise Business Solutions team. I think, Mayor, you hit on all the highlights that I was going to point out. We're asking for authorization to amend the existing agreement so that we can begin ordering different hardware and equipment so we can align this timing-wise with our patching that occurs next year. So we want to get ahead of that, and that's the reason for the emergency ordinance. I'll just pause there and ask if there are any questions.
No questions.
Okay.
Does that complete your presentation?
That completes.
Carla, is there any public testimony on this item?
It was the same two people.
Very good. Call the roll.
Udaley.
Thank you.
Fritz.
Another very important project that took a really long time to get done, and now it's working, so thank you. Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Happy to support it. Thank you. Aye. The ordinance is adopted. Next item, 1187.
Approve a $200,000 subrecipient contract with African American Alliance for home ownership asset preservation pilot program.
Colleagues, this is an important program. Portland Housing Bureau's subrecipient contracts leverage other city funding sources to help some of Portland's most effective nonprofit organizations to provide housing services to communities that are in the most need. Legal services to address home ownership issues such as estate planning, tangled title or legal ownership issues, or predatory mortgage servicing will promote asset preservation and intergenerational wealth building for low to moderate income homeowners, specifically in North and Northeast Portland. These culturally responsive services are provided to Portland's low to moderate income homeowners, helping to prevent displacement, stabilize neighborhoods, and preserve intergenerational wealth opportunities. Today we have the program coordinators, Dana Ingram and Barrett Ebright Carnes, here to present. Good afternoon. Thanks for being here.
Yes, thank you. Hi, hello. Good afternoon, Commissioners and Mayor. My name is Dana Shepard, and I actually manage the home ownership.
Sorry.
That's okay. The home ownership and home retention programs for the Housing Bureau.
Good afternoon, Commissioners and Mayor Wheeler. My name is Barrett Ebright Carnes. I'm Housing Program Coordinator and served as the RFP Solicitation Coordinator for this program.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the Home Ownership Asset Preservation Pilot Program, just to give you a little bit of background, there was a 2014-2015 community engagement process, which led to what we now all refer to as the North-Northeast Neighborhood Housing Strategy. And the strategy actually uncovered issues such as intergenerational property transfers, complicated real estate titles that affect long-term low to moderate income homeowners in North and Northeast Portland. And so recently, 2017-2018, the North-Northeast Oversight Committee expressed the urgency in addressing these issues. And through that advocacy in that group, $200,000 of federal funds, CDBG, was set aside for this work. So the program goals, homeownership retention, and legal services to prevent loss of housing wealth in Northeast community experiencing displacement of longtime homeowners.
And so this program will provide home retention and legal services to a minimum of 45 households. Legal services will include estate planning to help historically marginalized communities pass housing wealth to the next generation. Legal services will also address issues such as tangled title, legal ownership issues, and predatory mortgage servicing. Minimum eligibility criteria for this program will be homeowners earning up to 80% area median income or $70,300 for a family of 4. Homeowners must also reside in the Interstate Corridor Urban Renewal Area or the North-Northeast Study Area. This program will also provide targeted outreach and service prioritization to homeowners of color who've lived in their homes for 20 plus years in the Interstate Corridor Urban Renewal Area and the North-Northeast Study Area, and will also prioritize services to seniors and people with disabilities.
Request for proposals and the attentive fund. So the request for a proposal, $200,000 of Community Development Block Grant CDBG funds to be spent by June 30th, 2021. And just to let you all know, give you a little bit of background about the RFP itself. It was issued August 15th, and the requirements of the RFP, the fiscal agent had to be a nonprofit organization with experience serving low-income households, be culturally responsive, and have the ability to perform outreach in the targeted areas. So we do intend to fund $200,000 to the African American Alliance for Homeownership in partnership with the Commons Law Center. I'd just like to add that the African American Alliance for Homeownership currently has a subrecipient contract with the Housing Bureau, currently providing foreclosure prevention and retention services already and has for several years. Are there any questions?
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you so much for the presentation. I did have a couple of questions. My understanding is the African American Alliance for Homeownership used to have this contract and they lost it due to lack of performance a few years back. Someone else had it and now we're going back and giving it to them again?
That is not correct. This is actually a pilot program, and the Bureau has never actually executed these types of services. So this came from the North-Northeast strategy, their advocacy for these particular legal services, and so this
is a brand new program.
This is brand new. It falls in line with our retention services, but it is not a program that the Bureau currently serves. It's not a program that we have.
Does the Bureau know how many African American homeowners in the targeted area are insecure in being able to maintain their home ownership?
Well, through our home retention programs right now, we have an idea of, we serve through our home repair loan program, through our grant program, so we have a good idea of how many people are still in need of services past what we already do for them with those services. So we do expect there to be some outreach, and again, with this particular type of service, a lot of folks, they don't know what to ask for. And so that's a part of what we're trying to capture too. Like, folks don't know to come to us for these types of services, but we have recognized it when we provided a home repair loan of some sort.
So I've had Dr. Stephen Holt in front of me with his Right of First Return program that has not had success in actually reaching the goals of getting African Americans into home ownership opportunities for a whole host of reasons. What's going to be different about this program? Because in my year here, I've seen programs come and go that are supposedly targeted at this same demographic group, and the outcomes have been less than stellar.
I understand. So what's different? Well, again, these issues were revealed as far as the 2014-2015 community engagement, folks said that this is what they need, and also we found through our existing programs that these types of issues prevent folks from even being able to access our programs sometimes, like title issues and such. What's different, this is a pilot program, and we are committed to investing staff time, engagement from the PHP staff, oversight, evaluation, and analysis of the program. We'll be working very, very closely with the African American Alliance and the Commons Law Center.
Last question. What does success look like at the conclusion of this pilot?
Right. So legal issues is something that's very, very hard to determine the success right away, because our goal and our plan is to retain homeownership for the long haul, and also to give folks tools for intergenerational wealth and passing on properties. So what we want to do now is make sure that we touch at least 45 households. Actually, the African American Alliance is expected to actually serve way more than that, but that is just the goal. And so success for us just is making sure that folks have some type of legal connection. Do you have more to add to that? Okay. And some of the more simpler legal actions, we know that there's going to be more revealed, but we do want to connect them with some legal services, along with having the African American Alliance to kind of case manage those and hold their hands through that process.
So I would say either the three groups that you've prioritized, and as people of color, seniors, and people with disabilities, either of those groups, 45 would be just a drop in the bucket.
Absolutely.
How are you, what's the strategy to prioritize? I mean, if you don't know how many homes we have that are like, if we don't know yet how many homes are in, that could be lost, because of gentrification and people being pushed out, then I have a hard time trying to figure out how you're going to measure at the back end whether or not you've actually put a dent in the process.
I can say that we've done a few studies. I think that they're probably a year old. We have identified that there are plenty, way more than 45 households in the North-Northeast strategy area, longtime homeowners. So we definitely identified that. And even in our own pipeline of home repair loans and our partners, there's way more than that, significantly more.
I'll stop there.
Yes.
Any further questions? Very good. Is there any public testimony? Does that complete your presentation?
It does. Thank you.
Is there any public testimony on this item, Carla?
No one signed up.
All right. Very good. Let's call the roll.
Daly?
I'm really happy to support this item. I only wish we were doing this kind of retention work 10, 20, 30 years ago with the African American community. I've witnessed 2 of my neighbors in the last 12 or 13 years lose family homes that were owned outright, whether it was due to predatory lending or not being able to keep up with taxes or not being able to make repairs in order to refinance their homes. And it's just heartbreaking to see that happen. So I'm pleased to vote aye.
Fritz?
Thank you. That was a really thorough presentation and good responses, and I appreciate your work. Aye.
Hardesty?
Thank you so much for the presentation. And my questions are really around just having accountability built into these systems that, because we always talk a really good game about who we're going to help and how we're going to help them. But if we don't have measurable outcomes and we're not tracking them as they're being implemented, then at the end we end up going, I don't know why it didn't work. I don't know why it didn't work. And so it's important for me that we are being very thoughtful because, as you said, I mean, it's not just the urban renewal areas that have this issue of people being priced out of their homes. This is happening all over the city of Portland. And I would love to follow up with you about the history of the African American home ownership organization, because I do know that there has been a history that's been up and down, and I just want to know whether or not it is an organization that is sound now and will be able to fulfill the outcomes that this contract is asking them to do. And so in the meantime, I vote aye.
Wheeler?
So This contract requires very specific tracking and outcome performance reporting. And it would be my hope, and this is more, I believe, to the Bureau than it is to the organization. I would actually hope that we get that information, because I'd like to stay on top of it so that if there are issues, we have the opportunity to address them relatively quickly. But I also want to thank you for providing both specific performance measures and, I think, targeting very specific issues that I believe you can reasonably expect to resolve. So I don't think it was overambitious. I think you picked the right items and the right metrics by which to judge success. So I just want to shout that out and thank you for it. Obviously, I'm very happy to support it. I vote aye.
Thank you.
The ordinance is adopted. Thank you for coming in, and thanks for your patience today. Next item is a second reading, 1189.
Create a local improvement district to construct street, sidewalk, stormwater, utility undergrounding, and water main improvements in the Northeast Cooch Davis Street Local Improvement District in support of high-density, transit-oriented development in the Gateway Regional Center.
So, colleagues, last time we had a very interesting presentation and public testimony on this item. It's a second reading. Is there any further discussion? Carla, would you please call the roll?
Udaley?
Gateway has been waiting for this moment for 23 years, since the adoption of the 1996 Outer Southeast Plan. There are many people to thank that made this day possible, including property owners Gordon Jones, Joe Westerman, Jennifer Stedman, and Andrew Baltz. Special thanks to TriMet for partnering with PBOT to make transit-oriented development a reality and to help PBOT reach its equity and climate change goals by making a new and sustainable neighborhood in Gateway. We also appreciate the many stakeholders who are loyal to Gateway and have been so supportive of this project since Gateway was designated as Portland's only regional town center. Finally, a huge thanks to Andrew Abbey with PBOT for being such a good steward of these projects and for his determination to see this through. I vote aye.
Fritz?
Thank you, Commissioner Udaley, Chris Warner, the PBOT Director, and Andrew Abbey, the Local Improvement District Administrator. I'm going to go way back and thank Alan Riker, who was the planner in the Gateway Plan that walked me around this area. And I remember being admonished by one of the residents nearby that there were dirt streets and what on earth were we doing designating this a regional centre? And now it's going to happen, and I particularly appreciated the property management company who is going to make sure that people are not displaced, or when they are, that they can go back, that they have options, they have good choices. And that is really refreshing to see that this is being done right. And I predicted correctly that I didn't see a big splash headline on this, but it really should have a big splash headline. Aye.
Hardesty?
This is a project that Gateway desperately needs. This is also going to be a catalyst project. The question becomes whether or not the people who currently live in Gateway will be able to live there after we start this process. We're starting to see lots of construction taking place and improvements taking place in the Gateway community. I am cautiously optimistic that maybe there's one part of the city that we could actually do this in that will be right. If it's going to happen anywhere, Gateway is as good a place as any for it to happen right. So I vote aye.
Wheeler?
There does definitely seem to have been a tipping point reached in Gateway. I think about the Halsey 106, I think about the park, I think about the work that's being done around infrastructure, and now we add this important transportation program to Gateway. And what's interesting to me, thinking about what Commissioner Fritz just said, is that it takes a long time to prime the pump, but it's happened. And so my hope is that this will continue to lift the Gateway community in a positive way. And I'm happy to be here to see this next phase of the project go forward. Commissioner Udaley, thank you for your passion on this. And Andrew, wherever you are watching this, thank you again for a great community engagement process, and to everybody in the Bureau who worked so hard to make it happen. Happy to vote aye. The ordinance is adopted. Next item is 1190, also a transportation issue.
amend Transportation System Development Charge 2017 Capital Improvement Plan.
Colleagues, this is also a second reading. Any further business? Please call the roll, Carla.
Udaly?
Aye.
Fritz?
I will just state that one of the projects that's getting less funding probably affects my property, but I don't expect it to be done in my lifetime, never mind while I'm still living in the property. So I'm not recusing myself from the vote, and I'm happy to vote aye.
Hardesty?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye. The ordinance is adopted. Next item, actually, can I get rid of the second reading at the end? Then we'll go back to the last item, 1192, while we're on a roll with second readings.
Yeah.
Authorize the Bureau of Environmental Services to acquire certain permanent and temporary property rights necessary for construction of the Carson Basin Southwest 39th Avenue Project Number E11116 through the exercise of the city's eminent domain authority.
Any further discussion? Carla, please call the roll.
Udaly?
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye.
Hardesty?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye. Ordinance is adopted. Last item, 1191.
Authorize a competitive solicitation and contract with the lowest responsible bidder and provide payment for construction of the Hillsdale Crest Rainfall Derived Project Number E10941 for an estimated cost of $5 million.
Colleagues, this project will be undertaken by the Bureau of Environmental Services to reduce sewage overflows in the Burlingame Sanitary Basin in southwest Portland. Here today to give a brief presentation are Joe Dvorak, Pat Leese, and Ali Young from the Bureau of Environmental Services. Good afternoon.
Good
Thanks for being
afternoon.
here.
Thank you. So for the record, I'm Joe Dvorak with the Bureau of Environmental Services. I'll begin by giving a brief background slide on the project. So as mentioned, this project is located in southwest Portland. The sewers were built in the 1950s. So they were designed to carry the sanitary flows in a separate pipe than the stormwater. So sewage in one flow, stormwater in another. Despite that, every time it rains moderately to intensely in this part of town, we actually do get sewage coming out of the sewer pipes as shown in this photograph. So through investigation, we found that there are actually connections with the groundwater and stormwater system to the sanitary pipes. We entered an agreement with the Oregon DEQ in 2011 to reduce that contribution by 40%. So Patrick now will go through the details of how we plan to do that.
Great, thank you.
Our goals is to improve and reduce the stormwater sources that enter into the pipes. We're going to eliminate sewer releases up to the 25-year design storm, and then we're going to monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of these improvements. This slide here shows you a basic area of Portland and then the upper Hillsdale Crest area where the project is actually located. The dark line is the sewer lines that we're actually going to line. This here is just a basic project description. If you look at the picture on the left, you'll see a before and an after of a simple lining project. You'll see a pipe that has been cleaned, jetted before it's been lined, and then what it will look like after it's lined. There's also an animation to the right. That shows a root intrusion. That's the primary cause of what we're seeing here. We have a lot of terracotta pipe in this area. We're having root intrusion through the joints, and that's separating the joints, causing a lot of infiltration. So that if you look at the after photo, they'll go through there and they'll clean out all the roots, clean the pipes, and they'll line it.
So could I ask you a question on that? Because that's interesting to me. Once they clean out the roots, one would presume they come back or no?
The roots will probably come back, yes, but they will not be within the CIPP lining. The CIPP lining is a curtain-placed pipe, which will actually end up being a pipe in a pipe. So the roots will come back, but they'll form around that lining. Okay. And so it'll be like they're growing against a boulder or something like that.
You don't think it would defeat the lining? It's not
No,
possible.
it will not defeat the lining. The pipe is, I don't have the modulus of the strength of it, but it is a real hard pipe.
Okay. What is the lining made out of?
It's an impregnated sock. It's a sock that's got different types of stuff in it. That is a broad question because it's made out of a lot of stuff. There's some that have fiberglass in it. You got an impregnation stuff in there. And so it's basically you're blowing up a balloon and putting something hard inside of it and
So
you're curing
when
it.
you stick it, is it soft when you put it in?
Yes,
and you
it is
inflate
soft when you put it. It's a sock-like form. It's collapsed. It'll either be pulled in with a tractor or something like that, pulled from one manhole to
And
the
when you
next.
inflate it, how does it harden?
You inflate it with some type of air pressure or steam, and then you have a couple different ways of hardening it. One is thermal cure, which you'll inject steam into it and you'll have it cooked. So you're basically baking it. The other is like a UV cure. So like when you go to the dentist and get your teeth done and you get that UV light put on your teeth and that becomes real hard. It's basically the same process except for
That's
no
interesting.
pipe.
Thanks. Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor, because, I was actually, it's scary how much he gets into my brain and says the things that I was about to say. It's really scary. So the only question he didn't ask was, will the roots grow in between the two pipes and then the potential to burst the pipes because you have that roots inserted between the two?
No, they will grow in between the pipes, like I stated earlier, but it will not burst or degrade the other pipe. These cured-in-place pipe has been in place basically since the 1970s, and they have records where they've gone back and tested stuff after 50 years, and the pipe is super strong. They haven't had any failures because of a root growing into it. Like I stated before, it's like a root's growing next to a boulder or something like that. It'll grow around it, and it'll grow what it can, but it's like if you have a root in a pot, it can only grow so far. It's a clay pot. It's not going any further.
Right.
And the CIP is actually stronger than that clay pipe is.
So then it just begs the question, how come we didn't do that when we were putting the pipes down?
The CIP has to have a host pipe. It has to have a host.
Okay.
And so the clay pipe works as the host.
And the original pipes were built in the 50s, so this technology has just evolved over time.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
Thank you. That helps a lot.
Sure.
Appreciate that.
That's pretty much the gist of the project. We then had public involvement. Public involvement went out and they reached out to the different communities. They reached out to the residents, the schools, the businesses, 3 neighborhood associations. They did outreach methods, which include open houses, letters, periodic flyers, email updates, social media, phone calls, and door-to-door visits. They did have an open house at St. Andrew's Church. When it goes into construction, whenever we do a cured-in-place pipe, they make sure they go out 2 blocks past where the pipe is being put in place because of the siren smells that will come out of that pipe. So we want all the residents in the area, anywhere we think that it might flow into, to know that this is just part of the pipe and it is okay.
Commissioner Hardesty.
And so so my first question is around the community outreach and engagement. Was there good representation from residents, schools, businesses, neighborhood associations? Were there some groups you were not able to connect with?
We did bring our public involvement here with us. She'd probably be better to answer it, but I do believe we did have lots of good engagement with the public. This project's been going on for 2.5 years, so we've had lots of engagement.
You said this has been going on for 2.5 years?
2.5 years.
Hi, Commissioners and Mayor. My name is Ning Jiang. I'm the public involvement person for this project. Since early 2017, we've been doing public involvement in this area. It's mostly single home residential, and we have 1 church and 1 school towards the end of the projects. So, so far we haven't really heard a lot of complaints because of the relative low impact of this technology. We're not digging up the streets. We're not ruining people's gardens in this process. So far we've had pretty good representation from the community and not much complaint except for concerns from individual homeowners where we need to do some work on the easement in their home.
And will that change once the work starts and the smell starts becoming? Let me back up. Are people aware that the temporary impact will be that there will be these smells in their neighborhood that will be there until the construction, I'm assuming, is completed?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So in the communication we have done, we always state the construction methods and lead people to the web page for CIPP method, which states has like more than half a page dedicated to the smell and the health impact and the research we have done on the health impacts. And then during construction, we will do more outreach, and I assume I will receive phone calls from people concerned about the smell. And within Bureau of Environmental Services, we have CSA team, coordinated site analysis team, who upon request could go out on site and measure the intensity of the smell and communicate and ensure residents of its safety even further. So yeah, that's something we probably anticipate.
Commissioner Fritz.
When do you plan to do the construction?
We would like to, right after advertisement, and we get it contracted, we're planning on going early summer, so we're talking, my early summer is May. So we're hoping to start construction in May. Now that doesn't necessarily mean they start working right there. That's mobilization out there. They're first going to video all the sewer mains and all the laterals. So they're not going to see a lot of in-place CIPP for a while because the contractor needs to know what the pipe looks like, needs to know what the laterals look like prior to installing the pipe.
So that timing actually fits perfectly because I know that Environmental Services has a contract with Southwest Neighborhood, Inc. to do inserts into the South Sweeney newsletter. And in the Sweeney newsletter in May gets mailed to every single one of the 37,000 residents, including all apartment dwellers. So you'll be able to, in a very timely manner, give all the contact information and say, you know, this is what's going to happen. It's not odd. But if you are concerned, you can call this number. So great.
Wonderful. So next slide, I think, talked about construction and costs. So real quick, there you go.
Yeah, the cost, the engineered estimate for this project is estimated at $5 million. It's construction beginning in April, and this will be about a one-year project. Any other questions? Or
Commissioner Hardesty has one.
And do you have the RFP out, or you already have a contractor?
No, this is so that we can go to advertisement is what this ordinance is for.
So today is to authorize you to be able to go out and look for a contractor. Mm-hmm. Are there contractors that represent a diversity of communities that currently are in this field?
Yes, there are. We've been doing CIPP in the city of Portland for quite some time now. And so we do have different contractors that do a lot of outreach. The only ones that we're getting now into is the UV, and that's a more limited pool. But
the new V?
UV, just like what I told you about your dentist when you go and get that with the UV.
Thank you.
Great. Carla, is there any public testimony on this item?
No one else signed up.
Anybody want to? All right, very good. This is a first reading of a non-emergency ordinance. That was a really interesting presentation.
Thank you for the questions.
It moves to second reading, and we are adjourned. Nice job. We got a lot done today.